I was reborn on a scorching summer afternoon when I turned 30. Cicadas screamed hoarsely from the old locust tree in the yard, their cries sharp and endless. The sun burned fiercely like a basin of spilled fire, baking the concrete ground until it smoked and shimmered in the heat. I was struggling to hang a heavy cotton quilt over the clothesline. The stuffing inside, warmed by the sunlight, felt soft and cozy, releasing that clean, comforting scent of sunshine. In my previous life, it was at this very moment that I heard the news that changed everything. Bang, bang, bang! The iron gate of the yard rattled violently under a heavy pounding. Mrs. Carter, my loud-voiced neighbor from next door, burst in, her voice cutting through the thick, hot air. Emily, come out quick. Something terrible happened. Your husband, Captain Ryan, was gored by a bull on the back hill. He's covered in blood. Hurry, come help him. My hand froze in midair. In my past life, when I heard those words, my soul nearly left my body. I dropped the quilt to the ground without even realizing it and ran after Mrs. Carter like a madwoman. My mind went completely blank. There was nothing but fear, panic, and a sharp pain twisting in my chest, like a knife repeatedly stabbing into my heart. But now, I stayed calm. Slowly, I smoothed out the creases on the corner of the quilt, making sure it could soak up the sunlight evenly. Without lifting my head, I spoke in a voice as flat and cool as a glass of water gone cold. So he got gored. So what? I'm not the one herding cattle. What does it have to do with me? Mrs. Carter froze, clearly stunned by my reaction. She stammered. Emily, that's your husband, Captain Ryan. He's dying. I gave a faint hum and turned toward the well to draw a bucket of water to wash my hands. My voice stayed calm, without a trace of emotion. If he's dying, take him to the clinic. Why are you knocking on my door? Am I a doctor? Mrs. Carter was speechless, her mouth opening and closing without a word. After a moment, she stomped her foot and snapped, "You heartless woman, how can your heart be so cold?" Then she rushed off, probably to call some of the neighborhood men for help. I washed my hands slowly, dried them carefully, and went back into the house. Pouring myself a glass of cool boiled water, I drank it one sip at a time. My heart was as calm and still as a dead lake, but only I knew what lay beneath that still surface, a storm of hatred and resentment that could drown the world. Ryan Miller, my husband, commander of the 2nd Battalion of the 337th Regiment, a young, promising officer admired by everyone in the military district, a man with a bright future ahead of him, and also a hypocrite, a liar, a heartless man who deceived me so cruelly and destroyed my life. In my previous life, when I heard that he had been gored by a bull, I lost all sense of reason. I ran all the way to the back hill in terror, and when I saw him covered in blood, shielding another woman with his body, it felt like the sky had collapsed. That woman was Lily White, my so-called cousin, the girl who had grown up in my home, whom I had treated like my own sister. At that time, Ryan was barely conscious, yet he still grabbed my hand and begged me not to blame Lily. He said she was innocent, that she had only fallen with him while trying to save him, and I believed him. I believed every word that man said. I believed Lily's tear-streaked, delicate face, her pitiful sobs that made her seem fragile and pure. I took Ryan to the hospital and stayed by his side day and night. When he finally woke up, the first thing he asked was, "How's Lily?" My heart shattered, but I forced myself to go to the next ward to check on her. Lily had only a few scratches, yet she cried as if she were dying, clutching my hand and sobbing. "Emily, I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have dragged Ryan up the hill to pick wild fruit." And I believed her. I foolishly thought it was just an accident. I forgave them both. But what did I get in return? After Ryan recovered, he grew colder and more distant with me, while Lily, under the excuse of repaying him for saving her life, started visiting our home even more often. She washed and cooked for me, my sister and my brother-in-law, keeping the house spotless and perfectly run. Everyone in the military housing praised her for being so dutiful and sensible, urging me to cherish such a good little sister. Only I, like a fool, stayed up countless nights quietly weeping against Ryan Miller's cold back, wondering if I had done something wrong. Then I became pregnant. My morning sickness was severe. At night, I would wake starving, and looking for something to eat in the kitchen, I ran into my good husband and my good little sister. In the dark kitchen, They were entwined like two slimy eels, shamelessly tangled together. I felt as if struck by lightning. My whole body went cold. The child in my womb seemed to sense my despair and kicked me fiercely. I lunged forward, and maddened, started beating them. What happened next was this. Ryan pushed me aside to protect the woman he loved, and I slammed against the hard stove. A hot, bloody tide poured out of me. My baby, the child I had waited 3 years for, was gone. When my mother learned the news, she was so shocked and grief-stricken that she suffered a cerebral hemorrhage and died not long after. My life completely fell apart that night. Ryan and Lily covered it all up because they were afraid it would ruin his military career. To the outside world, they said I had carelessly fallen and caused the miscarriage. My mother-in-law, Margaret Miller, even pointed at my face and cursed that I was useless, a woman who couldn't bear children, and a bringer of doom. I endured 10 cold years in that house. During those 10 years, I watched Ryan rise higher and higher, from battalion commander to regimental commander and then to division commander, while he and Lily carried on their secret affair and even had a child together outside. As for me, I became a resentful woman, trapped in the prison of a military marriage, withered and joyless. Eventually, after years of depression, I developed cancer, and at 30, I died alone on a hospital bed. Before I died, I saw Ryan bring Lily and their lively, adorable little son to visit me. Lily leaned against him, her belly already showing, clearly pregnant again. He looked at me with unashamed pride and triumph and said, "Sister, thank you for vacating Mrs. Miller's position." Ryan only frowned impatiently and urged, "Are you done? This place is unlucky. Let's go." Overwhelming hatred consumed me. I swore that if there were another life, I would make that pair pay in blood for their crimes. I never thought I would actually come back to the very beginning of all this tragedy. Bang! The yard's iron gate was kicked open. My mother-in-law, Margaret Miller, burst in like a black whirlwind. The moment she saw me sitting calmly inside, drinking water, she exploded. "Emily, you cold-hearted witch. Your husband is dying out there, and you have the nerve to sit here drinking water? Is your heart made of stone?" Margaret's voice was sharp enough to cut through eardrums. Many people in the housing compound were startled and poked their heads out to watch. I set down my ceramic cup and gave her a cool, indifferent glance. In my last life, the thing I feared most was that mother-in-law. She favored sons and was sour and cruel. I had married into the Millers 5 years before and endured plenty of her venom. Every time she glared at me, I was frightened like a quail. But now, looking at her face twisted with rage, I felt only a cold, scornful amusement. "You came at just the right time," I said, rising slowly and without hurry. "I was just about to ask you, is Ryan Miller your son or mine?" I asked. Margaret froze, stunned. "What kind of nonsense are you talking? Of course he's my son," she spat. "If he's your son, then why didn't you rush to save him when he got gored by the bull? Why come to my house and make a scene?" I smiled faintly, but the smile never reached my eyes. "Do you really expect me, a weak woman, to lift him off a bull's horn?" I said. "You're twisting facts." Margaret's face flushed a dark, liver-like red with anger. "He's your husband. You were married for days and shared kindness for years. How can you be so cold-blooded?" Cold-blooded. The word sounded like the biggest joke. I sneered once. "Mother, you must have forgotten who said back then that a daughter who marries out is like water poured away, and that a wife who comes into the household becomes part of the Miller family. So why, when Ryan got hurt, did your Millers not go save him, and instead come here to blame an outsider like me? What kind of logic is that?" My words hit home. Margaret was left speechless, and the neighbors who had gathered looked at one another in stunned silence. "Yes, it doesn't make sense," someone murmured. "When a son is in trouble, the mother doesn't rush to the scene. She runs to her daughter-in-law's house to scream. What kind of thing is that?" Margaret's face shifted between pale and flushed. She didn't expect the normally mild, obedient daughter-in-law to suddenly be so sharp-tongued. Pointing at my nose, she finally managed to choke out, "Fine, Emily. I see your claws have grown. Wait until Ryan comes back. Let's see how he deals with you." "Fine, I'll be waiting," I shrugged indifferently. "Though whether he comes back or not is another matter. After all, that bull doesn't see." "You wicked woman, how dare you curse my son to death?" Margaret trembled with rage and raised her hand to slap me. I went cold, stepped aside, and moving with the motion, grabbed her wrist. I'm not very strong, but years of farm work have given me a solid grip. Margaret, pampered all her life, was no match. If you've got words, say them. Don't start hitting, I said coldly. There are so many people watching in the housing compound. Are you really going to throw yourself into a tantrum here over your son, who's been fooling around with another woman and disgraced the Miller family? Fooling around with another woman? Margaret froze and, almost without thinking, asked, while the neighbors perked up, eyes burning with curiosity. I curled one corner of my mouth. That's exactly the effect I want. Want to know? Then come with me to the back hill and see for yourselves. I shook her wrist off and said lightly, it'll be a good chance for everyone to open their eyes and see how your precious son, our battalion commander of the 337th, Ryan Miller, heroically saved a beauty. With that, I stopped talking to her, walked straight out the gate, and headed toward the back hill. Margaret stood rooted to the spot, her face changing color like the weather. She refused to believe her ever-upright son would do such a thing, but my certainty made her uneasy. In the end, she gritted her teeth and followed, full of suspicion and anger. A large crowd of onlookers from the compound surged after us. The path to the back hill was rough, but I moved quickly. I had run this road once before in my last life and knew it well. We hadn't reached the foot of the hill yet when we heard a sudden clamor of voices, and as we pushed closer and parted the crowd, everyone gasped. On the grass below the slope lay Ryan Miller, his body soaked in blood, one leg twisted at a grotesque angle, clearly broken. His uniform was slashed in several places and the grass beneath him was stained red. The sight was shocking. Even more shocking was his posture. Like a beast protecting its kill, he was using his body to shield a woman pressed tightly to his chest, forming a protective pose. The woman wore a fashionable floral dress. Aside from her hair being a little messy and a few bits of grass clinging to the hem, her dress was almost immaculate. She was buried in Ryan's arms, her shoulders shaking with small, plaintive sobs, looking so fragile, so innocent, so pitiful. Who else could she be but Lily White? My God, isn't that Emily's cousin Lily White? How is she with Captain Ryan and clinging to him like that? Murmurs rose and fell through the crowd, and people's expressions shifted into something complicated. Some sympathy, some scorn, some schadenfreude, directed squarely at me. To them, I, the legal wife, must be mortified and wishing the ground would swallow me up. But I just stood there quietly, my face showing no extra emotion. Ryan, my son. Margaret finally came to her senses and screamed a piercing cry, then lunged forward as if mad. She knelt beside Ryan, wailing loudly while trying to shove Lily out of his arms. You seductress, you bringer of bad luck, you ruined my son. Get away from him. Lily was pushed and stumbled weakly to the ground, a tear-streaked, delicate face looking up at me with tearful eyes. Her voice choked with grievance as she looked at me. Sister, I didn't mean it. Brother-in-law was saving me. Such a frail, innocent white lotus. In my last life I was fooled by that act, but now it only made me sick. I couldn't even be bothered to glance at her. I watched the spectacle coolly. What are you all standing there for? Somebody come quick, save my son! Margaret shouted to the onlookers. A few officers' wives who knew Ryan reacted and hurried forward, flustered, trying to lift him. Don't move him, a cold voice commanded, and everyone froze and turned to see who spoke. It was me. Margaret bristled like a cat with its tail stepped on and erupted. Emily, what are you playing at? Are you hoping my son dies? I ignored her shouting and walked straight to Ryan's side. I crouched down and examined his injuries carefully. His back had a long gash from a bull's horn. His ribs felt sturdy, but his left leg was fractured. His injuries looked serious. The most dangerous was probably his head. He had lost a lot of blood, his face was as pale as paper, and he was slipping into a semi-conscious state. In such a condition, moving him carelessly could easily cause secondary injury or even be life-threatening. His leg was broken, and his spine might also be injured. Don't move him carelessly, I said calmly to the family members who were about to lift Ryan. What we need to do now is find a wooden board, or even a door panel, and use it as a makeshift stretcher. We have to move him onto it carefully and keep him flat, then get him to the clinic as quickly as possible. My words were clear and firm, my tone steady and composed, carrying a quiet authority that left no room for argument. Everyone froze, surprised. None of them had expected that I, Emily, the soft-spoken, seemingly gentle woman who rarely said much, could be so calm and decisive in such a critical moment. "What do you know?" Margaret snapped stubbornly. "You just don't want to save my son." I stood up, looking down at her from above, my gaze as cold as frost. "If you keep standing here making a scene and delay his treatment, and something really happens to Ryan, can you take responsibility for that?" My voice wasn't loud, but every word landed like a hammer blow to Margaret's chest. She was startled by the cold determination in my eyes, opening her mouth but unable to speak a word. "What are you waiting for?" "Go find a door panel," I ordered, turning to a young officer's wife nearby. Startled by my authority, she instinctively responded, "Okay," and rushed back toward the housing compound. Moments later, several men came running with a door panel they had taken off its hinges. Under my direction, everyone moved carefully, lifting Ryan with slow, steady precision and placing him onto the makeshift stretcher. Throughout the entire process, I remained composed, like a seasoned field medic, calm, efficient, without a hint of panic. In my previous life, when I cared for my mother through her final months of cancer, I had learned a great deal about first aid and nursing. I never imagined those lessons would one day be used to save the man I despised most in the world. The irony cut deep. I looked down at Ryan, unconscious on the stretcher, his face pale and bloodless. There was not a single ripple in my heart. I wasn't saving him because I still loved him. No, he would not die so easily. I wanted him to live, to stay conscious and watch himself fall from grace, lose everything, and taste the pain of ruin. Only then would the debt from my previous life be repaid in full. That was the true meaning of my rebirth. Just as everyone was fumbling to carry Ryan down the hill, Lily, who had been conveniently ignored until now, decided to start her performance again. She weakly climbed to her feet, limping over to me, clutching the hem of my clothes as she sobbed uncontrollably. "Emily, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's all my fault. If I hadn't insisted on dragging Ryan up here, none of this would have happened." As she spoke, she glanced at the crowd from the corner of her eye, perfectly aware of every gaze. That self-blaming, pitiful act, so delicate, so practiced, could have fooled anyone. And sure enough, a few clueless onlookers began to speak up for her. "Oh, come on, Emily. Your cousin didn't mean for this to happen. Don't be too hard on her." "Yeah, look at the poor girl. She's pale as a sheet. Captain Ryan got hurt trying to save her. He's practically a hero." Hearing those words, I almost laughed out loud. A hero? A man who risked his life for the woman destroying his own family while leaving his wife behind. Was that what they called a hero? I looked at Lily coldly, watching her act unfold in front of me with flawless skill. "So," I said slowly, my voice cutting through the murmurs, "what you mean is, Ryan got gored because he was trying to save you?" My voice remained calm. Lily hadn't expected me to ask that question and froze for a moment before nodding quickly, like a pecking chick. "Yes, Emily." The bull suddenly went crazy and charged at us. Ryan pushed me out of the way, and then, her words trailed off as she squeezed out a few tears, pretending to be heartbroken. "Oh, really?" I said softly, glancing around until my gaze fell on a small, messy patch of trampled grass nearby. A wicker basket lay overturned there, with wild vegetables and mushrooms scattered all over the ground. I walked over and picked up a red crushed mushroom, then brought it back and held it in front of her face. "Then maybe you can explain this to me. Were you two here to pick wild fruit, or to collect mushrooms?" I asked, raising the mushroom slightly. My eyes were sharp as blades. "And what about this one, this bright red mushroom, glossy, smooth, and deadly poisonous? Were you planning to take it home and eat it yourselves? Or were you planning to feed it to me?" The moment my words fell, the entire place went dead silent. Every pair of eyes turned away from Lily's tear-streaked, pitiful face to the mushroom in my hand, its vivid red color gleaming ominously under the sun. Most people in the compound had grown up in the countryside and knew very well which mushrooms were safe and which were deadly. The one I held was among the most poisonous found in the mountains. One bite could kill. Lily's face went pale as paper. She stared at me in horror, her lips trembling, speechless. She clearly hadn't expected me to notice such a small, insignificant detail. I didn't know it was poisonous, she stammered weakly. I just thought it looked pretty. Pretty? I let out a cold laugh. Lily, you've lived in my house for 10 years. My mother took us up the mountain to pick mushrooms every year. She taught us over and over again, more than 100 times, which kinds were edible and which were deadly. You expect me to believe you didn't know this one was poison? I forgot, Lily murmured, her eyes darting away, her voice shrinking to almost nothing. Forgot? I took a step closer, my tone rising sharply. No, I think you remember it all too well. You two came out here pretending to pick mushrooms, but what were you really doing in this deserted place? What dirty little secret were you hiding? Or maybe, I leaned in, my words cutting through the silence like a knife. Maybe you picked the poisonous mushrooms on purpose, to take them back and poison me. That way, you and your lover could finally be together without guilt or consequence. My words struck like thunder, exploding through the crowd. Gasps and murmurs rippled around us as everyone's faces filled with shock. An affair inside a marriage, and now a suspected poisoning. The accusation was almost too much to take in. Yai, you're lying! Lily shrieked like a cat with its tail stepped on. Emily, you're slandering me. Ryan and I are innocent. We didn't do anything. Innocent? I smiled, though there was no warmth in it, only cold contempt. Whether you're innocent or not isn't for you to declare. When Ryan wakes up, we'll go to the military security office together. We'll tell the truth in front of the officers and see what they say. At the mention of security office and officers, Lily's face turned ashen, paler than death. She knew exactly what that meant. If this scandal reached the military's upper ranks, Ryan's career would be over. And as for her, she'd be branded a homewrecker who'd interfered in a military marriage, with no way to escape the consequences. No, please don't, she stammered, her panic finally breaking through the fragile mask of innocence. She was completely undone. She instinctively grabbed my hand and begged, Sister, I beg you, please don't, this was our fault. I'll kneel and apologize, just don't make this a big deal. With that, she flopped down and actually knelt. In that instant, even the dullest person could see the truth. If they were truly innocent, why panic like this? Suddenly, everyone's expressions shifted. Whispers ran through the crowd. So what Emily said was true. Captain Ryan really did have an affair with his sister-in-law. Faces that had looked sympathetic to Lily turned to contempt and disgust, while the looks aimed at me were filled with pity and compassion. The few military wives who had earlier defended Lily now wanted to sink into the ground, their faces burning as if they'd been slapped. I watched Lily kneeling at my feet without a trace of satisfaction. This was only the beginning. All the pain they had heaped on me in the last life, I would return it 1,000-fold. Ryan Miller was taken to the military clinic. After emergency treatment, his life was saved, but his left leg was shattered. Even if it healed, it would be crippled. Worse, he had a mild concussion. The doctors couldn't say when he would wake. Margaret cried and raved in the ward, sometimes cursing Lily as a temptress, sometimes accusing me of being cruel and refusing to help. I couldn't be bothered to argue. I slapped a hospital invoice down in front of her. Medical fees, 327 yuan. Please pay this. What? Margaret sprang up like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. Why should I pay? Ryan is your husband, of course you should. First, I said, shrugging honestly, I have no money. Ryan's pay card had always been in his own hands. He only gave me 20 yuan a month for living expenses, so I had no savings. Second, I added, each word deliberate as I looked at her, he's lying here because he went to save another woman. On both moral and practical grounds, this bill shouldn't be mine. Either go find your precious son and Lily White, who you hold on a pedestal, or pay it yourself. If the hospital stops his medication, the consequences will be on you. With that, I turned and walked away, ignoring her twisted face. Emily, you stand right there, you heartless woman. Margaret screamed behind me, but I didn't listen. Back in that so-called home, I began packing my things. I couldn't bear another moment in this house full of humiliation and tears. In my last life, I was driven step by step into despair here. This time I would cut it all off myself. Divorce was inevitable, but before I signed the papers, I had to secure the greatest possible benefit for myself. I opened the locked wooden box at the head of the bed, Ryan's treasure chest where he kept his savings and some important documents. In my last life, I never knew where the key was, but now I did. I lifted the bedboard and felt along the inner beam until my fingers found a cold key. This little secret he'd thought hidden from everyone had been seen by me long ago. I opened the box. Inside, neatly arranged, were a bank book, stacks of cash bound by rubber bands, his officer ID, and some honor certificates. I picked up the bank book, and when I saw the number on it, a cold laugh escaped my lips. Oh, 1,500 yuan. Ryan earned just over 80 yuan a month, and in 5 years, after sending money to his family and covering his own expenses, he had still managed to save this much. Meanwhile, I, his wife, received only 20 yuan each month for household expenses. Whenever I asked for more, he'd glare at me like I was greedy and unreasonable. How ridiculous. Without hesitation, I slipped both the bank book and the bundles of cash into my pocket. That money should have been partly mine anyway. It was what I deserved. Then my gaze fell to the bottom of the box, where a small stack of pink envelopes lay neatly tied with a ribbon. The delicate handwriting on them was painfully familiar. They were letters from Lily White to Ryan. My hands trembled as I opened one. Ryan, my dearest, just seeing you stand next to Emily today broke my heart. I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I can't control myself. Why wasn't I the one who met you first? Ryan, I know your training must be exhausting, so I made your favorite, braised pork, and hid it in the kitchen cabinet. Remember to eat it tonight, but please don't let Emily find out. Ryan, how much longer do we have to sneak around like this? I love you so much. I'd do anything for you, even if it means being called shameless or cursed by others. Each letter was more explicit than the last, every word soaked in lust and deceit. The earliest one was dated 2 years after our wedding, so they had been secretly entangled right under my nose for years, while I, the fool, had treated Lily like my own sister, always giving her the best of everything. What a joke I was. The searing pain and hatred nearly swallowed me whole. I clenched the letters so tightly my nails dug deep into my palms until the sting of pain finally brought me back to my senses. No, I couldn't lose control. I couldn't let my rage consume me. These weren't just letters. They were evidence. Proof that could pin those 2 despicable people to the pillar of shame forever. My sharpest weapon. Carefully, I gathered every letter and hid them close to my body. Then I began the first step of my new life plan, to make money. I would never again depend on a man or live like a humiliated housewife with no dignity. I needed a career. Something that would let me stand on my own feet. The first thing that came to mind was my skill in cooking. My grandmother had been a famous cook in our hometown, and I had learned everything from her since I was a child. I especially excelled at making sauces and marinated dishes, my signature recipes. In my previous life, I had spent years cooking for Ryan and Margaret, trying to please them with delicious meals, but they never once praised me. This time, I would turn my cooking into my sharpest weapon. The military compound housed hundreds of families. Most of the men were soldiers, and the women, apart from caring for their children, spent their days chatting or playing cards. The potential for small business here was enormous. I decided to start with my best recipe, homemade spiced beef sauce. I gathered the 10 yuan I had secretly saved over the years, and took part of the cash from Ryan's box. Then I went to the market to buy the freshest beef, chili peppers, fermented soybeans, and an assortment of spices. I locked myself in the kitchen all afternoon, slicing the beef, stir-frying, mixing oyster sauce and seasonings, every step done with absolute care. Soon, a powerful, rich aroma began to fill the air, thick and irresistible. The rich aroma from my kitchen drifted out into the open air, carried by the breeze through every corner of the military compound. It was a layered scent, the deep savor of beef, the fiery punch of chili, the earthy tang of fermented soybeans, and the harmonious blend of a dozen fragrant spices. Who's cooking something that smells this good? My mouth's watering just from the scent. I can't stand it anymore. Tonight I'm making my husband buy some pork head meat to satisfy this craving. One after another, the officers' wives were drawn out of their homes, following the irresistible trail of fragrance. When they discovered the smell was coming from my kitchen, their faces filled with surprise. Wait, is that Emily's house? She can make something like this? At that moment, I walked out of the kitchen carrying a large basin. Inside was the freshly cooked batch of beef sauce. Its deep red color glistened with oil, the sauce rich and glossy. Chunks of beef were soaked in chili red oil, sprinkled with white sesame seeds, and even the sight of it was enough to make mouths water. "Ladies," I greeted them with a smile, "this is my homemade beef sauce. Come and try it while it's fresh." I had prepared slices of steamed bread, clean and ready. Scooping a spoonful of beef sauce, I spread it on a slice and handed it to them. The women hesitated briefly, then each took a bite, and in the next second their eyes lit up. "Oh my God, this is amazing. It's incredible, so fragrant, spicy, and just a little sweet. The beef is tender and flavorful. It's perfect. Emily, your cooking is unbelievable. Why have you been hiding this from us?" The compliments poured out one after another, and as I watched them devour the food with such delight, a genuine smile spread across my face. I knew then my first step had succeeded. "If you ladies like it," I said, seizing the moment, "you can buy a jar to take home. It goes perfectly with rice, noodles, or bread. My sauce uses high-quality ingredients and is completely clean and safe. Each half-pound jar is 5 yuan. 5 yuan a jar? In an era when pork cost 70 cents a pound, that was practically a luxury price." Predictably, the women hesitated. "That's a bit expensive, isn't it?" "Yeah, for that price I could buy several pounds of meat." I wasn't discouraged. Smiling patiently, I explained, "Ladies, it takes a full pound of beef to make just half a jar of this sauce. Every bit of it is real beef, cooked with top-quality spices and canola oil. The cost speaks for itself. Plus, it's perfect with meals. Just one spoonful can flavor an entire bowl of rice. It saves on groceries, and it's great for your husbands after training, or for your growing kids. It's nutritious and filling." My words struck a chord. Their husbands were soldiers who trained hard every day, and most of the women wanted to give them something hearty to eat. Wang, a friendly officer's wife I'd known for years, was the first to speak up. "All right, Emily, I'll take 1 jar. My husband loves spicy food. This will be perfect for him." "Sure thing," I said cheerfully, quickly packing her a jar. Once the first woman bought, others followed. "Get me 1 too. I'll take a jar as well." After tasting it, everyone could tell the sauce was worth every penny. Real ingredients, rich flavor, completely satisfying. Within half an hour, the large basin of beef sauce was completely sold out. I counted the bills in my hand, over 100 yuan in total, nearly a month and a half of Ryan's salary. Holding the warm cash, I felt a sense of security I hadn't felt in years. So this was what it felt like to earn money with my own hands. It felt incredible. Just as my little business was booming, an unwelcome guest appeared at my gate. Standing there was Lily White. She had changed to clean clothes and applied light makeup to hide her exhaustion, but her eyes, still swollen and red from crying, gave her away. But no matter how much makeup she wore, Lily still couldn't hide how pitiful and disheveled she looked. When she saw me surrounded by a crowd of officers' wives, their eyes filled with admiration, and noticed the thick stack of cash in my hands, a flicker of jealousy and resentment flashed in her eyes. "Sister," she greeted softly, her voice trembling, pretending once again to be fragile and pitiful. The moment the other women saw her, the smiles on their faces disappeared. Their gazes turned cold, sharp with disdain. After what had happened on the back hill, Lily's reputation in the compound was completely ruined. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice icy. I couldn't even bother to give her a full glance. "Emily, I came to bring Ryan some clean clothes," she said weakly, biting her lip. "And Aunt Margaret asked me to find out whether you plan to pay Ryan's medical fees." She raised her voice deliberately, just loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, trying, as always, to make herself look innocent while painting me as the cruel wife who didn't care if her husband lived or died. But this time, her scheme backfired spectacularly. Before I could even respond, Wang, one of the more outspoken wives, snapped, "Lily, do you have a wall for a face? How dare you show up here after what you did? You've got some nerve strutting around after nearly ruining that man's life." Wang was blunt and never minced words. "If anyone should pay those hospital bills, it's you. If you hadn't seduced Captain Ryan, he wouldn't be lying in that hospital right now. I've seen shameless women before, but you take the prize." You mess around with someone else's husband and then try to blame the wife? You make me sick. Her words hit hard. The other wives chimed in one after another, their scolding overlapping until it was like a storm of sharp tongues. The air was filled with contempt, and Lily looked like she might collapse at any second, her face pale as chalk. It's not what you think, she stammered, trying desperately to defend herself, but her voice was drowned out by the others. I watched her, standing there so small and broken under everyone's disgusted gazes, and a cold smile curved on my lips. His clothes are inside, I said flatly. Go get them yourself. Then I pulled the hospital bill from my pocket and handed it to her. As for the medical fees, here's the invoice. You and Margaret can figure out who's paying. Just don't expect me to. Lily stared down at the paper, then back up at me, her eyes brimming with bitterness and disbelief. She couldn't seem to understand how, in just one day, the woman she used to toy with so easily had become someone so composed, so confident, so unshakable. Emily, don't go too far, she hissed finally, dropping the act and gritting her teeth. If you treat Ryan like this, once he wakes up, he won't forgive you. Really? I gave a small, indifferent laugh. Then I'll wait, but if I were you, I'd worry more about yourself. Adultery with a married soldier is a serious crime. With that, I turned and walked back inside, slamming the door shut behind me. Lily was left standing alone in the courtyard, her face burning under the weight of everyone's judgmental stares. In the following days, I cut off all contact with the Miller family completely. I didn't visit Ryan at the hospital, nor did I respond to Margaret or Lily's attempts to reach me. Instead, I threw myself entirely into my new business. After my beef sauce became a huge success, I launched new products: mushroom meat sauce, spicy chicken cubes, and several refreshing side dishes. My cooking was excellent, my ingredients fresh, and my prices fair. Soon, my name spread throughout the entire compound. Every afternoon, a long line formed outside my door, people waiting eagerly to buy my food. Business was booming. In just 1 week, I earned more than 500 yuan, an amount I hadn't even dared to dream of in my previous life. For the first time ever, I understood what it felt like to truly lift my head high and breathe freely. So this was what true confidence born from financial independence felt like. That day, I was busy in the kitchen stirring another batch of sauce when Wong came rushing in, breathless. Emily, something's happened. Captain Ryan is awake. My hand paused for only a moment before I continued stirring calmly. Then he's awake. So what? Wong stomped her foot anxiously. How can you be so calm? I heard that as soon as he woke up, Margaret and that Lily girl started bad-mouthing you, saying you didn't care whether he lived or died and that you ran off with all the family money. Ryan got so furious, he said he's going to report you to the officers and divorce you. I gave a faint smile. What's meant to come will come. Turning down the heat, I untied my apron. Thank you for telling me, Wang. I guess it's time I paid them a visit. When I arrived at the hospital room, their little family meeting was already in full swing. Ryan, thank God you finally woke up. Margaret sat by the bed, crying dramatically and clutching a handkerchief. If you'd stayed unconscious any longer, that heartless woman would have bullied me to death. Beside her, Lily was carefully peeling an apple, her voice soft and syrupy. Ryan, please don't be angry. Emily probably just made a mistake in the heat of the moment. Ryan lay on the hospital bed, his face still pale but his eyes burning with rage. The moment he saw me, that fury ignited like dry tinder. Emily, you've got the nerve to come here? He shouted, trying to sit up but wincing as the pain shot through his leg. Why wouldn't I dare? I crossed my arms, looking down at him with quiet composure. This is a hospital, not your house. I'm just here to watch the show. Is that not allowed? Ryan's chest heaved with anger, his face twisting. Margaret leapt up and jabbed a finger toward me. Don't even talk to her, Ryan. This woman's heart is pitch black. You risked your life saving someone, and what does she do? She's out there making money, living her best life, and she even stole all the money from home. A woman like her doesn't deserve to be part of our family. You have to divorce her. Divorce? I raised an eyebrow. Fine, I agree. I happen to think your son isn't worthy of me anyway. The room fell silent. All three of them froze, clearly stunned. They must have thought I'd react the same way I had in my past life, crying, begging, desperate not to be abandoned. A flicker of confusion crossed Ryan's face, quickly replaced by deeper anger. To him, my calm defiance was nothing short of humiliation, a direct blow to his ego. "Emily," he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain, "don't think I don't see through you. You just want to get more money out of this, don't you? Well, that's not happening. You neglected your wifely duties, left me for dead, and even stole family assets. I'll report you to the military. You'll leave this marriage with nothing." Hearing his righteous tone, I couldn't help but laugh. "Captain Ryan, have you already forgotten why you're lying here in the first place?" I walked closer to his bedside, looking down at him. "You said you were saving someone, right? Who exactly?" I pointed at Lily, who instantly went pale. Ryan's eyes flickered, and the confidence in his voice faltered. "She's your cousin," he said defensively. "She was in danger. I couldn't just stand there and do nothing." "How noble," I said coldly. "Truly touching." I clapped my hands slowly, the sound echoing through the sterile hospital room. "Righteous heroism, rescuing a damsel in distress. How moving that sounds, doesn't it, Captain Ryan?" My voice was calm at first, but each word grew sharper, colder. "But tell me, while you were being this so-called hero, did it ever cross your mind that you're a married man? What exactly were you doing, running off into the wilderness in broad daylight with an unmarried woman? And what about the part where you two were found clutching each other on the ground? How do you explain that?" My tone rose, every sentence striking like a hammer, pounding directly into Ryan's chest. You're talking nonsense. We're innocent," he shouted hoarsely, forcing out the words through gritted teeth. "Innocent?" I sneered, pulling the stack of pink envelopes from my coat. I threw them hard at his face. The letters scattered across the bed, pale pink pages fluttering to the floor. The sickly sweet salutations and shameless confessions written across them made everyone's eyes sting just to read them. Margaret couldn't read, but she wasn't stupid. The instant she saw the color drain from both Ryan and Lily's faces, she knew something terrible had happened. Ryan stared at the letters, frozen, his mind blank. He couldn't comprehend how the things he'd hidden so carefully had ended up in my hands. These, he stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "What? You don't recognize them anymore?" I picked up one of the letters and opened it right in front of him. "Ryan, the nights without you feel unbearably lonely." I let out a sharp, bitter laugh. "Captain Ryan, seems you've been enjoying quite the romantic life, haven't you?" "Emily, that's enough," Ryan roared, his voice breaking with humiliation and rage. "Enough? Oh, it's far from enough." My eyes turned to ice, blazing with fury that had been buried for years. "Ryan Miller, Lily White, you two disgusting adulterers toyed with me for years, made me your fool. And now you think a single word, enough, can make it all go away?" I took a step closer, my voice steady, cutting through the room like a blade. "Don't forget where you are. This is a military district. Military marriages are protected by law. You committed adultery, and I have the proof right here. I'll take these letters straight to the political department and hand them to the officers myself. Let's see if you can still call yourself a captain after that." A panicked scream burst out, not from Ryan, but from Lily. She collapsed to her knees with a loud thud, crawling toward me and clutching my leg, sobbing uncontrollably. "Emily, please. I was wrong. I know I was wrong. I'm begging you, for the sake of our sisterhood, don't do this. If you hand those in, Ryan's career will be ruined for life." For the first time, true fear flickered across Ryan's face. He knew every word I said was true. If those letters reached the commanding officers, his military career would be finished, something worse than death for a man like him. "Emily," his tone softened, trembling, carrying a hint of pleading. "Please, for the sake of our marriage, show me some mercy. Let's end this peacefully, all right?" "End this peacefully?" I gave a low laugh that shook with bitter irony. "You, Ryan Miller, want to talk about marriage with me? Where were you when you pushed me so hard I miscarried? When I lay bleeding on that cold operating table, where were you then? And when my mother died of a stroke because of you, where were you?" I took a breath, my voice rising with every word until it cracked like thunder. "And now you dare to talk to me about love, about mercy? Don't you think that's pathetic?" My words struck the room like lightning, leaving Ryan and Margaret completely stunned, their faces pale with shock. How could they not know about my mother's death? Oh, right, those things hadn't happened yet in this life. For a moment, I almost forgot. I wasn't that 30-year-old Emily anymore, the woman consumed by pain and hatred. But that didn't matter. Either way, this marriage was ending, and I would make sure it ended on my terms, with dignity and in full view of everyone. I would make the whole world see that it was the Millers who had wronged me. "You don't want me to make this public?" I said, my voice cold and steady as I hid every flicker of emotion. "Fine, I'll agree to keep quiet, if you meet 3 conditions." Ryan looked as if he'd just grabbed a lifeline. "What conditions?" he asked quickly. "First," I began, "we divorce. You will submit the application to the military yourself, citing personal misconduct as the reason, and you'll voluntarily give up all shared marital assets. Second, the house we're living in now belongs to me. The savings book and the cash in your box will also go to me, as compensation for emotional damage. Third, your family must publicly apologize to me in front of everyone in the military compound. You'll admit that you were the one who cheated first and clear my name completely." With every condition I listed, Ryan and Margaret's faces grew darker and uglier. By the time I finished, Margaret's expression was as black as soot. "This is robbery," she shrieked. "That house was assigned by the military. The money belongs to Ryan. How dare you demand everything, you greedy woman?" "Greedy?" I lifted the stack of love letters lightly between my fingers. "These alone are enough to destroy his career and have him expelled from the army. The house, the money, they're still his choice to make. His future, however," I smiled thinly, "that's up to him." Ryan's jaw clenched so tightly that I could see the veins standing out on his forehead. He knew I had him cornered. Half his life had been spent clawing his way up the military ranks. He couldn't afford to lose it all now. After a long silence, he seemed to deflate entirely, slumping back against his pillow, eyes closed. "I'll agree," he said finally, his voice strained, the words forced through gritted teeth. In that moment, I saw pure despair flash across both Margaret and Lily's faces. But inside me, there was only calm, profound, liberating calm. The cage that had trapped me for 10 years in my previous life was now shattered by my own hands. True to his nature as a man of action, Ryan didn't waste time. Maybe he was afraid I'd change my mind, but the very next day, even with his injured leg, he went personally to the political department to file the divorce request. In his written report, he took all the blame upon himself. His tone was sincere, his attitude perfect. Normally, the military leadership preferred to save a marriage rather than break one, as the saying went, and they even tried to persuade me to reconsider. I said nothing. I simply placed the stack of pink letters and the preserved red poisonous mushroom specimen on the political officer's desk. After reading the letters, his face darkened instantly. When his eyes fell on the mushroom, he slammed his palm on the table. He couldn't believe that one of his most trusted officers, someone he'd personally mentored, could commit such disgraceful, immoral acts. The divorce was approved on the spot. Moreover, Ryan received a major demerit, effectively ending his chances of promotion for the foreseeable future. When I finally walked out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, divorce certificate in hand, the sky above was bluer than I had ever seen. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, the air itself tasted like freedom. According to our agreement, the Miller family was required to apologize to me publicly. That afternoon, Margaret appeared, supported by Lily, her face pale and trembling. They stood in front of the compound bulletin board. In front of everyone, Margaret read out with a voice full of humiliation and resignation the facts. Ryan had cheated, they agreed to divorce, and he would leave with nothing. Though she tried to phrase it vaguely, everyone understood perfectly. In an instant, the whole compound exploded with gossip. The looks people gave me were no longer pity or sympathy, they were respect and admiration. In this era, a woman bold enough to initiate a divorce and force the cheating man to leave empty-handed was almost unheard of. I, Emily, had done it. I became the war goddess in the eyes of the other wives, while the Millers and Lily became the hated rats everyone wanted to chase away. I heard later that after the apology, Margaret fell ill, and Lily, unable to stand the neighbors' whispers, slunk out of the compound. As for Ryan, he became the biggest joke in the regiment, the fool who threw away his future and family for a mistress. After he was discharged, his leg was still weak and he limped when he walked. The once vigorous battalion commander had turned into a withdrawn, gloomy man, and none of that had anything to do with me anymore. I moved as fast as I could to sell that house full of bad memories and converted it into cash. Between the money from the sale, the earnings from my sauces, and Ryan's compensation, I had a substantial startup fund. I left the military compound, rented a small storefront in the city, and officially opened my own pickle and sauce shop. I named it simply Sue's Sauce Garden. On opening day, Wong and many of the compound's officers' wives came to support me, filling the little shop to bursting. From day one, business was explosive. Thanks to my unique flavors and honest quality, Sue's Sauce Garden's reputation spread quickly throughout the city. My little operation grew over the year, from a small workshop into a food processing factory with more than a dozen workers. I bought a new home, a small car, and became a locally known female entrepreneur. One day I attended a business conference at a hotel, and at the entrance I saw a figure both familiar and foreign: Ryan. He wore a faded, washed-out old uniform and stood at the hotel door as a security guard. He was thinner and older-looking, half his hair gone white, and his left leg still moved stiffly. He saw me step down from a gleaming car in a smart skirt, radiating confidence and composure, and his eyes registered shock, regret, and a tangle of disbelief. Our gazes met for a moment. I gave him a slight smile. No hatred, no grievance, only calm indifference, because to me he had long since become a stranger. I straightened my back, clicked my heels on past him without looking back, and walked into the glittering hotel lobby. I knew then that my brand new life was only just beginning, and that he and his family would have to live out the rest of their days in remorse and disgrace. That, I decided, would be the best revenge of all.